There are hearings going on behind closed doors. Many of my colleagues have tried to attend some of those hearings and have been turned away if they're not on the committees of jurisdiction. Colleagues that have tried to go and read things like the Volcker testimony and have been turned away, denied the ability to do that. And so there's a real concern that there is an attempt to impeach a president of the United States, remove a president who was duly elected, using a process of secrecy behind closed doors, where one person is setting the rules, breaking with the tradition that we've always had, with the only 3 other times in our country's history where an impeachment inquiry began in the House. In all of those cases, they laid out rules of fairness, where people were able to ask questions on both sides. People were able to call witnesses on both sides. Even the president would be able to have an opportunity to have somebody there to also question people. That's always been the case. And yet it's not the case here. And so very serious questions of fairness have been raised. And I would ask the gentleman, are we going to finally get beyond this secret, closed-door, star chamber process of impeachment and go to something that is rooted in fairness? And I would yield to the gentleman.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I reject wholly and fully the premise underlying the whip's representation. There is no unfairness in this process. The Republicans are like the lawyer who neither has the facts, because if he has the facts, he pounds on the facts. Or if he has the law on his side, he pounds on the law. But if he neither has facts nor the law on his sides, he pounds on the table, Madam Speaker. He makes noise. The Republicans talk about process, not the substance. And the process, quite interestingly enough, is much of what the Republicans put in the rules that we included in our rules when we adopted them. And as the whip clearly knows, one of the strongest advocates and defenders of the President of the United States sits there in the hearing, asks questions, can review documents, and can go right back to the White House and to all your members and say, this is what happened. There is no unfairness in this and no requirement that we have a vote. The committee is doing its job of fact-finding. Frankly, the White House counsel wrote a letter filled with 8 pages that clearly misconstrues the status of this process, treats it as if it were the trial. We do not conduct the trial, Madam Speaker. The Senate conducts the trial. And just as in our legal due process system, when that occurs, the President will have all of those due process, I'm sure, extended to him by the House of Representatives. That's not what this proceeding is. This proceeding is to decide whether there is probable cause to think that the President of the United States has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. We have not made that conclusion yet. And we may not make it if the facts do not lead us there. And as Mr. Schiff pointed out in his letter to all the members, there's a very definite reason why grand juries and this committee is doing its process with full participation by the Republican members of the Select Committee on Intelligence. Full participation. It is because witnesses ought not to be forewarned of what somebody else has said. Why? So that they don't parrot the other witness, but tell the truth as they know it to be. And I will tell the gentleman the other reason the grand jury are in secret is to protect the innocent. So that if there is no probable cause, there will be no assertion that somebody alleged that somebody did something wrong. But the Republicans have been pounding on process. And the reason they have, Madam Speaker, is they don't even want to discuss the substance. Of course, the acting chief of staff did discuss substance. It's on the front page of the Washington Post. Of course we do this. So I will tell my friend, this process is fair, it's consistent with the rules, it's consistent with the Constitution of the United States, it's consistent with the laws of this country. And it is about one of the most serious matters we can deal with. And we don't want to make it a circus. Yes, the committee is doing its work, in camera, so to speak, adducing the facts. And your members, and particularly one of the president's strongest supporters, defenders, and collaborators, is sitting in the room every time a hearing occurs, unless he absents himself. And the members of that committee, which you have appointed, not you personally, but your caucuses or your conferences appointed, are sitting in the room, equal time, asking questions. So this hearing is fair, judicious, thoughtful. And the attempt to besmirch the chairman of the committee is shameful. He is a fair and experienced member of this body who has conducted himself as he should. But it is our constitutional responsibility, Madam Speaker, to see the facts behind conduct which may rise to the level of a high crime and a misdemeanor. We don't know that to be the case, but if it is, we will meet our duty to the Constitution, to the laws of this nation, and to the American people. I yield back to my friend.
With all due respect, this process is rotten to the core. You could talk about process, you could talk about facts, and the facts point out that this process is shrouded in secrecy. You literally have a chairman who was running around for 2 years during the whole Mueller investigation saying he had, quote, more than circumstantial evidence that there was collusion between the president and Russia. And then the Mueller report comes out, and there were no charges. There was no collusion. In fact, the chairman never showed his secret evidence. If he had evidence, more than circumstantial, his quotes, then he should have showed it to the American people, but he didn't, because there was no evidence. Those were the facts. And if the facts were there, you know he would have shown that evidence. It didn't exist. And so instead of moving on and taking care of the work of the people of this country, it's another witch hunt. It's another fishing expedition in secret. And so you talk about fairness. Why is it that voting members of Congress are being denied access to the room? The press doesn't have access to these hearings that you call fair. You call them fair. There was never even a vote of this House to start an impeachment inquiry. It was a decree from the Speaker. In the Washington Post in September, quote, therefore today I am announcing, the Speaker of the House, I am announcing the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. That's a decree by the Speaker of the House. That's never happened before. The other 3 times where there was an impeachment inquiry, it was started with a vote of the full House. Everybody was accountable. No star chamber, no 1 or 2 people in this country that think that they could run the entire process and deny the people the right of a duly elected president to serve because they just don't agree with the results of the 2016 election. They never showed high crimes and misdemeanors. Your side has never shown high crimes and misdemeanors. You're just looking around for something. And you're calling witnesses, and you talk about fairness, and who's in the room? Our side cannot call witnesses. You think that's fair? Our side The president's own counsel, the gentleman will have an opportunity.
That's your rule.
Because the gentleman made
That is
a lot.
your rule.
This
Mr.
is
Scalise.
your rule. You're in charge of the House.
In the
You're
Republican
the one who made the
rules
official
that we
decree. This is
adopted.
my time. I'll yield to you in a moment. But if you want to talk about fairness, let's lay out the facts, because these are the facts. Our side cannot call witnesses. You could change that rule today. And I would ask the gentleman, would you be willing to change the rule to let our side call witnesses, to let the president's counsel be able to question witnesses who are in secret making charges against him to try to literally undo the results of a duly elected president? Would you be willing to change the rules to do that? I would yield to the gentleman.
You're fine. We're going under your rules.
These are
You're
the majority party.
When we were in the minority, we were not allowed to do what you are requesting to do. We were not allowed to do it.
We never
in
tried
any
to
of the
impeach
hearings.
a president,
It was
with all due
your
respect.
rules, Mr.
And in
Scalise.
all three cases
Ask your
where there
counsel.
was an impeachment,
Ask your
the
counsel
rules
if
allowed
those
for
were your
both sides
rules.
to have fairness.
Ask your counsel if
You
those were
think
your
fairness
rules.
is you being able to control everything and not letting the other
Madam
side
Speaker,
participate?
apparently he does not want to answer
Madam Speaker,
about
I've
it
claimed the
being
time.
his
Gentlemen,
rules.
gentlemen, please, let's have some order.
Appreciate it, Madam
You
Speaker.
can proceed.
And so let's look at the process. Let's look at the facts. And yes, if you think it's fair that you can control everything and deny the ability for members of Congress to go in and see what's happening behind closed doors in that room, if you think it's fair to deny the ability for both sides to call witnesses, hey, you get to call your witnesses and you think that's fair, and you don't want anything to be disclosed. You talk about innocence. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. You think the president should have to go prove his innocence time and time again? And with anonymous sources, in many cases citing things that are inaccurate, that have been disproven. But you can lay false claims out, and the chairman can lay false claims out, and then the president's got to go prove his innocence. And time again, we see that even with these selective leaks that are coming out of your committee, which shouldn't happen, many of those are disproven too, but the damage is done. Just like when the chairman opened up the committee hearing with a parody, stating things that were false, that were not part of the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky, giving his own version of it, which was false, while the public was watching on TV thinking that was the transcript. That's disingenuous. That is not a fair process, but that's what happened. Just today and yesterday and every day, we've had members of our party, I don't know if any members of your party have tried, members of our party who wanted to try to go down there and read the Volcker testimony or sit in the hearings were turned away because the process is going on in secret. This is not fairness. This is not how it's always been done. And if you really think it's unfair and you think the rules should be changed, you do get to control over that. I'll write the rule with you and we'll vote for it together. We could pass that rule today. In fact, I filed a rule change with Ranking Member Cole of the Rules Committee to allow members access to these hearings. Would you be willing, I would ask the gentleman, would you be willing to schedule this rule for the floor so we could have more fairness in this process? And I would yield.
Does the gentleman not trust Mr. Nunes? Apparently, there's no answer to that question. Mr. Nunes is the ranking Republican, a very close friend, associate, and defender of the President of the United States. He is there to hear every word. My presumption is he also can tell every word to his colleagues.
Well, let me ask the gentleman, will he allow Chairman
Madam
Nunes
Speaker, I
to
still
call
have
witnesses?
He yielded to me. Is he reclaiming his time and shutting me up?
Well, you asked a question. Could I answer the question?
No, you didn't answer it, but if you want
I'm
to
not
answer
trying to
it.
answer
Do you
it.
trust Mr. Nunes?
I would trust Mr. Nunes to have equal access to calling witnesses just like Chairman Schiff does, to subpoena people that Chairman Schiff can do that Mr. Nunes cannot. Why is Mr. Nunes denied those same rights that the chairman has? And I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. He hasn't answered my question yet, but I will assert again.
I would trust him to
Anybody
run
who's
that
listening,
same fair process.
we are operating,
but he's denied that.
with respect to that, under the rules that the Republicans adopted in their rules package and applied to our side when we were in the minority, Madam Speaker. The same rules that they imposed upon us, they are now complaining about because they don't think they were fair. Apparently, they thought they were fair when they were applied to the Democratic minority. But apparently now those same rules, their rules, they adopted, they voted for, are not now fair because they're in the minority. Very frankly, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's fair to the goose is fair to the gander. They're your rules, Mr. Scalise. You ask your counsel. We adopted your rules on the issuing of subpoenas. Your rules.
With all due respect, the goose is being cooked behind closed doors because you started an impeachment inquiry by decree. You could change the rules today if this is an impeachment inquiry, if it is, and I would ask the question, are we in an impeachment inquiry right now?
We're in an exercise of our constitutional responsibility.
Of an impeachment, is it yes or no? Is
the gentleman going to let me answer?
I would ask him. It's a yes or no question, but I would yield.
The answer is we are involved in exercising our constitutional responsibility to oversee, to make sure that the laws of this nation and the Constitution of this nation are honored in practice and in spirit, but particularly in practice. Let me ask the gentleman a question. Do you think it's okay to ask foreign leaders to interfere in our elections?
Well, is the gentleman yielding?
I am certainly. It's your time. You yielded to me. I'm asking you a question.
So as the
you want to talk about process, that's substance.
As the so-called whistleblower complaint started with leaks to the press where they said there were quid pro quos in the phone call with Zelensky. That's where this all started.
You want me to read you the transcript?
This was before the transcript was released. There were all of these insinuations. And this is a pattern, by the way, we've seen even going back to the Mueller investigation. And again, I cited the chairman running around saying he had more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. And there was no collusion. So now we move on to this claim of quid pro quo. Well, first of all, you can name all the whistleblowers you want. You won't. You won't even allow the whistleblower to be interviewed. Somebody who's trying to take down, someone who was deemed to have a political bias is trying to take down a president of the United States in secret, behind closed doors, with innuendos. I would absolutely yield.
When he's talking about the whistleblower, is that the person that the President of the United States ought to be treated as if he had done treason, and we know what we do to those who commit treason? Is that the whistleblower you want outed? Is that the whistleblower you want to expose to that kind of danger? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, first of all,
Madam Speaker, I would ask the whip.
If you would yield. If you're talking about the whistleblower, we're talking about a whistleblower, again, who was deemed to have a political bias, who got all of their information secondhand. And oh, by the way, the standard for being a whistleblower used to be firsthand information, and secretly, days before the whistleblower complaint was filed, after going to Chairman Schiff's staff and working with partisans to develop the whistleblower complaint, they changed the rules for even designating what is a whistleblower so it could allow secondhand information. Who changed that rule? Boy, we'd sure be curious to find out, but you don't want us to find that out because you're holding all of this in secret. Shouldn't we know what's really going on and what's behind this so-called whistleblower complaint that's been debunked? So many of those claims were debunked. There was no quid pro quo. In fact, the two people that were on the phone call are the ones that are really in question here that both said there was nothing wrong. Both of them. In fact, Zelensky said there was no pressure. He wasn't even aware that any funds were being held up. He praised the president for selling Javelin missiles to Ukraine, which, by the way, Barack Obama would not sell when he was president of the United States. He withheld the Javelin missiles that Ukraine was asking for to defend themselves against Russia. Again, we talk about Russia. Who stood up to Russia? President Trump stood up to Russia by allowing Ukraine to buy the Javelin missiles to bust the tanks. Barack Obama wouldn't sell those. I don't know why he wouldn't allow Ukraine to stand up to Russia. I don't know why Barack Obama allowed Russia to interfere with our elections and didn't do more to stop it. But we should be getting to the bottom of that. And yet we're not, because it's all a focus of secrecy, drip-drab leaks selectively to try to give a false narrative. Our members can't go talk to our other colleagues about some of the things that happened in those hearings. It's all secret. We want it to be opened up. In fact, that's why I filed a rule change. And again, I would ask the gentleman, would he support a rule change that would allow all members to participate and be involved in at least sitting in on these hearings to see what's really going on? If you're going to ask people to impeach the President of the United States, and again, it's always been done by the vote of the House. Now it's being done by a decree from the Speaker. And you won't answer the question of whether or not, yes or no, it's an impeachment inquiry. The Speaker said it's an impeachment inquiry, but we've never voted on it. Why don't we have a vote like we did all other times to set real rules of fairness? They always set rules of fairness where both sides got to participate. Real due process, which is part of our constitutional duty. That's being denied in secret. That's what's happening in that room right now. And I would yield.
Madam Speaker, there is no such rule. None.
There is.
But Mr. Scalise believes, Madam Speaker, the more he repeats that, somebody will believe it.
Well, why are
The more
members being
tweets
denied
that go
entrance to
out-
the room? They're being turned away today.
Have you yielded to me?
I would yield.
Thank you very much. There is no such rule. There's no requirement for any committee to undertake any investigation that you have to have a rule passed by this House. And the gentleman apparently thinks that by having an investigation, an inquiry, that somehow that's an impeachment. It's not. He is absolutely right. To impeach would have to have a vote of this House. Clearly, that is correct. That is consistent with the Constitution and the laws of this country. There is nothing that says, other than the Republicans who repeat it ad nauseum, because they're hopeful that some people will believe what they say, that somehow this is unfair, that Democrats and Republicans sitting together as the constituted Select Committee on Intelligence are looking at this matter. Everybody has a right to ask a question in the room. All the members have a right to review the materials. What he doesn't like is the rule that they put in place, Madam Speaker, about who can call witnesses. They said the minority could not call witnesses unless the chairman and the committee approved of it. That's their rule, not our rule. We adopted our rule. We kept that rule in. I asked the gentleman, Madam Speaker, a question. Does he believe it is right for a president of the United States to seek foreign interference in our elections? He has not answered that question. It's not a transcript, it's a report of the conversation which came from the White House. I would hope we could count on its accuracy. President, quote, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." What do you think "though" means? Yeah, I know you want something, but I'd like you to do a favor, though. Mulvaney, aid withheld to press Ukraine. Now, he doesn't say what it was for. I get that. But you don't think President Zelensky had any doubt? I'd like you to do a favor. Now, the whip, Madam Speaker, has not answered my question whether he thinks it's appropriate for a president to ask a foreign leader for help in the elections, whether it was the 2016 or 2020 elections. I happen to believe it was the 2020 elections. He talks about Hunter Biden. He talks about Joe Biden all the time. So it would not be an unreasonable conclusion that that's what he was talking about. Let me ask you another thing.
But would the gentleman yield on that specific accusation you just threw out?
Before I do that, let me say collusion, by the way,
but it needs to be answered,
friend, is not a crime. However, Mr. Mueller did find that there was reason to believe that there was obstruction of justice, which is a crime. He said, however, that under Justice Department rulings, he could not indict the sitting president. So he referred it to us. Now, he is not a special prosecutor, as Mr. Schiff pointed out. The special prosecutors that precluded the two most recent impeachment proceedings, by the way, did their work in secret. They did their work as a grand jury does their work. And by the way, I know the gentleman, I don't think the gentleman's a lawyer, but the grand jury, people under investigation do not have the right either to question, present evidence, or have counsel present in a grand jury. That is the prosecutors trying to find out whether there is probable cause that a crime has been committed by A, B, or C. And at that point in time, if the grand jury agrees, an indictment is laid down, and then all the due process rights to which Mr. Cipollone talked about in his letter. He did go to law school, and I don't know how he wrote that letter. It's been panned by almost every legal scholar that's reviewed it. But I will tell my friend, do you believe it is appropriate to need a favor clearly about the elections, whatever election? Do you believe it's appropriate for us to ask a foreign leader to involve themselves in our elections?
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding because there were many things that were thrown out there that need to be addressed. First of all, the Department of Justice disagreed with Mueller's assessment that he didn't have the ability to bring charges. He had full authority to bring any charges, and he brought 0 charges. Mueller had full authority to bring charges and brought 0 because he found nothing. And Justice even said he didn't have the authority. I'm going to yield in a moment after I go through the different claims you made. It's real interesting that the majority leader read selectively from that conversation between President Trump and Zelensky on will you do me a favor. So let me read you the full sentence because you're trying to take one context and shift it somewhere else, which has been done over and over by Chairman Schiff and others. So let's start. Quote, this is President Trump. Quote, I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say crowd strike. That's the sentence where he said, I would like you to do us a favor, not me, us. Please read the transcript. That's what he said. And when he said, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. The corruption was going on in Ukraine. The interference from Russia, much of it was emanating from Ukraine in 2016. We know that. Don't deny that. Don't try to hide that. Quote, I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say crowd strike. He's not talking about Biden. He's not talking about some future election. He's talking about the company that was looking into the corruption and the interference by Russia in the 2016 election. We still haven't gotten to the bottom of that. This is part of it. This absolutely went through Ukraine. And by the way, in the NDAA, a law that's on the books today that the gentleman voted for and I voted for, the law requires that when the United States of America is giving money to a foreign country, they have to make sure that they're looking into whether or not there's corruption. And so he's absolutely looking into the corruption because we're sending hundreds of millions of dollars over there. And before they sent the hundreds of millions, the law, not his personal preference, the law says he has to look to make sure there's no corruption. That's in the NDAA law that we passed last year. That's current law. And so the president's complying with the law, asking him, do us a favor, us, not him. Please make that note accurately. And then he asks about CrowdStrike, not Biden, CrowdStrike. We all know what CrowdStrike was involved in. They were involved in looking into some of the illegal activity that Russia was participating in to try to interfere with the 2016 election. We still haven't gotten to the answers to that. I wish your committee would be spending more time on that so that we can stop it from happening again. And so that's what he was talking about. That's the context. It's not accurate. It's not fair to try to read it out of context and then go attribute it to something else, because many have done that on, I would like you to do us a favor. And then he says, all of this stuff that was happening in Ukraine, they say crowd strike. That's what he asked about. I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I know he's very interested in reading the whole thing. So let me read him some more of the report we got from the White House. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution. A lot of people want to find out about that. So Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, that doesn't sound to me like the 2016 election. If you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. What do you mean he doesn't mention Biden? I'll give you a copy of this if you'd like, if you want to read the whole. I've read the whole thing. What do you think Giuliani was talking about? 2016? Two of his compatriots, of course, $1 million bail. The ambassador fired. Why? Because she wouldn't cooperate with making a foreign leader complicit in the elections of the United States of America. She had the courage to come testify, as did the security advisor for Russia from the White House in this administration. Now, frankly, Madam Speaker, I don't think this is the time to argue the case. The time continues to be finding out the facts. Finding out the facts. Those facts, every day, are more instructive. Whether it's Mr. Giuliani, the president's lawyer, who was substituted, Madam Speaker, for the State Department. A private State Department. He still hasn't answered my question. Is it appropriate? I want a favor. And oh, by the way, the Bidens, you know, that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, but you really ought to look at them.
Well, the gentleman,
Everybody that's looked at this has said, including the present prosecutor, or the recently present, I don't think he still is the prosecutor, but the subsequent prosecutor said, we looked at this, nothing there. Nothing there. That wasn't acceptable, of course, to the President of the United States, so he kept beating on it. And he had $391 million needed by our Ukrainian friends to defend themselves against the Russians, otherwise known as Putin. Maybe Putin didn't want that money to go to Russia, to go to the Ukraine, Madam Speaker. We just did a resolution for which Mr. Scalise voted. And that resolution essentially said that the actions taken the other day by the President in a phone call with the authoritarian leader of Ukraine helped Russia, helped Iran, helped Syria,
with all due respect,
and hurt our allies.
The resolution does not say that.
And hurt our allies in the fight against ISIS, and is now reached an agreement that the President claims some victory on, where the Turks got everything they wanted and our allies are going to be pushed out.
I would hope the gentleman's not trying to conflate Ukraine with Turkey and Syria and the Kurds, because you
No,
just
sir.
made that assertion, and that's not.
No, I did not make that assertion.
You did.
What I said was that we are going to obviously have, and the committee is having, a hearing on that very matter without a vote of this committee, because it is their responsibility. And
maybe
your
that's something
minority,
else
and
you'll
your
try to
minority
impeach the
member,
president
Mr.
on,
McCall,
too,
is for that resolution
behind
that's going to
closed
come
doors.
out on the Turkish sanctions. My point to you is there was no vote of this body that they should do that. They're doing their responsibility as the Select Committee on Intelligence, as the Judiciary Committee, as the Foreign Affairs Committee, as the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. They're doing their duty. And when they reach a conclusion, they will come and report to us, and they will report perhaps no finding, or maybe they will report we have findings, and as a result, this body will vote. But the gentleman has still not answered my basic question. Do you think it's correct for a president of the United States, clearly, if you read this, you wanted to read the whole thing, you read the whole thing. It clearly, almost everybody that's read it, even some of Mr. Trump's friends who he's now mad at, have read it and said, look, this was not proper. And I'm asking, Madam Speaker, whether the whip thinks it's proper to ask a foreign leader to interfere in our elections.
Well, first of all, there was no foreign leaders being asked to interfere with elections. Russia was trying to interfere with our elections when Barack Obama was president, and President Trump is, in this phone call and in other actions, trying to get to the bottom of how the Russians interfered to make sure it doesn't happen again. And he also has legal authority in the NDAA to focus on decreasing corruption as it involves taxpayer money. And that was what they were discussing on that phone call as well. But getting back to the issue of the hearings, because the gentleman keeps talking about the hearings and what this committee might produce as if they're having hearings on a bill to lower drug prices, which, by the way, we could be focusing on lowering drug prices. There was a unanimous
we
bill
did
that came out of
yesterday,
committee
as you know,
to lower
Madam
drug prices,
Speaker.
but the gentleman won't bring that bill to the floor that would pass and be signed into law today, and families across America would be paying lower prices for drug costs. But we don't get that opportunity because they're focused on an impeachment inquiry. And again, it was the Speaker's own words. She says this is an impeachment inquiry. And so you're trying to play it both ways. You're trying to say, oh, it's just the committee doing a normal hearing. It's not a normal hearing. Every time there's been an impeachment inquiry, there were rules laid out by the House through a vote of all members of the House all 3 times. Even going back to Andrew Johnson, they voted in the House. For Clinton, they voted in the House. For Nixon, they voted in the House, and both sides had fairness. Both sides could call witnesses. That's not the case today. Only Chairman Schiff gets to call the witnesses. Oh, gee whiz, other people can question Schiff's witnesses. Well, why can't everybody question Devin Nunes' witnesses or Jim Jordan's witnesses? Because they're not allowed to come forward under your rules. And again, we have a rule, it's 103A2. You cannot say that members are not being denied entrance. The rules of the House, which you're in the majority, you can change, we can change, but every time there's been an impeachment inquiry, all 3 times, this House established those rules. And so you want to deem an impeachment inquiry by the Speaker's decree, not a vote of the House. Well, if you're going to do it, then do it the fair way that it's always been done, where both sides can call witnesses. Both sides can issue subpoenas. The White House can actually have counsel to ask questions to witnesses, some who have made statements that have been deemed inaccurate. But you won't allow the people that were there that can deem it inaccurate to come testify, because you don't want both sides of the story. You want to be able to present some one-sided report and say, here, this shows us what we wanted. Because if a prosecutor wants to go and find somebody guilty, they can meander around and look, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work where the prosecutor sees something wrong, then they go out and in a fair process find it. That's the Justice Department, by the way, the judicial branch that does it. Adam Schiff is not a prosecutor in this case. He might have been a prosecutor in his previous life, but he's a chairman of a committee in Congress now. He's not a prosecutor, but he's acting like one. And he's doing it in secret without fair rules. I can't go into that hearing, and you can't go into that hearing. Rank and file members can't go into that hearing. They're being denied today the ability to do it, and you could change that rule. If it's truly an impeachment inquiry, and again, you won't answer the question yes or no, but the Speaker said it is. And if it is, then treat it like every other impeachment inquiry where there is fair due process on both sides, not just your side. You might like the fact that only you can call witnesses, but you know that's not fair. You know that's not a fair process, and it's not how it's been done in all other cases. And so I would just ask the gentleman, would he be willing to treat this impeachment inquiry, as the Speaker designated it, like all of the other impeachment inquiries in the history of this Congress have been held in a fair process? I yield.
Mr. Scalise ought to know this is not like any other one. I'm not sure about Johnson, so I haven't. There was a special prosecutor in the Nixon case. Nixon fired the first one, Mr. Cox, you recall. Mr. Jaworski succeeded him. There was a special prosecutor in the Clinton case. All of them did, not exactly, because all the Republicans are in the room that are on the committee, members of the committee. It's a select committee on intelligence. The Intelligence Committee operates that way, consistent with their rules and with your rule. You continue to say, we ought to change the rule. It is your rule that we adopted in our own rules. You didn't like it. You liked it when it was applied to us, but you don't like it when it's applied to you.
We never had an impeachment inquiry. We're talking about an impeachment inquiry, which has been done before. There's precedent 3 times, and it's always been done the same way. You're now having an impeachment inquiry, but you're treating it as if it's a secret, closed-door hearing, which it's not.
Will you yield?
And I will yield.
Madam Speaker, the whip continues to ignore the fact there were very different circumstances. There were 2 special prosecutors with respect to Nixon, and one special prosecutor with respect to Mr. Clinton. That was a radically different position than we find ourselves in today. Mueller, by the way, was appointed by the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, a Republican, appointed by the President of the United States of America, Mr. Trump. Not our guy. He appointed. Now, he dismisses that the special, he's not a special prosecutor, but I forget exactly what his title was. In any event, wasn't a special prosecutor, but he did in fact find that there was reason to believe that there was obstruction of justice.
But he filed no charges. He had authority. He filed no charges. He found nothing that rose to the level of filing charges that he had the full authority to do.
That is inaccurate.
That is
Madam Speaker,
accurate.
that is inaccurate.
Did he file a charge?
Did
he file a single charge? Please name it, because I haven't seen the charge, because it doesn't exist.
And why, will the gentleman yield?
And I'll yield.
Why didn't he file a charge? And if you read the report, as I'm sure you did,
So you're acknowledging it
he
is.
said, I didn't file a charge because I cannot file a charge against the President of the United States.
And Department of Justice disagreed
under
with that.
Justice Department rules.
But he had the authority.
He was an employee and working for the Justice Department. He was under the aegis of the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. He was not an independent actor, a special prosecutor. He was an employee of the Justice Department, and the rules that Mueller followed under the Justice Department is you cannot indict a president. He said, however, the Congress can take action. He said that. He said we were the proper authority to take action in a case like this. We are doing that. He puts a lot on inquiry. Investigation, inquiry, hearing. It's a fact-finding process in the pursuit of our constitutional duties to find out whether high crimes and misdemeanors have been committed by the President of the United States. It's a hearing. It's an investigation. Call it an inquiry. The Speaker said inquiry. I adopt that language. Investigation, hearing, whatever the language is.
But impeachment inquiry is
But
different.
the substance of these charges, and I asked him about one, he hasn't answered that question, whether he thinks it's appropriate to ask a foreign leader for a favor. He says, no, he didn't ask for a favor. He said, by the way.
He asked for a favor to look into CrowdStrike. Again, read the sentence.
Why did he mention the Bidens?
A lot of people are asking about the Bidens, by the way.
Oh, that's reaching.
Don't think that's anything new.
Because that was the subject of the discussion, Madam Speaker.
CrowdStrike was the subject of the favor for us, for our country to find out how Russia interfered with the elections. And by the way, all 9 Republicans of the House Intelligence Committee sent a letter to Chairman Schiff accusing him of, quote, withholding the existence of documents from the minority. So you want to talk about fairness? Maybe it's fair for you to withhold information from the minority members of a committee during an impeachment inquiry, withholding information, hiding it, keeping it in secret, turning away other members of Congress from even walking into the room. And you're going to defend that? We would join with you today to establish rules of fairness. You don't have to make them up. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, because in all other 3 impeachment inquiries, they did it the same way, where both sides had true fairness. If you think fairness, just because you have the might, doesn't make it right, you have the majority, so you can call your witnesses and shut everybody else out. And, quote, withholding the existence of documents from the minority. That's not the way to conduct an impeachment inquiry.
He means, would the gentleman yield?
And those are your rules. I would yield.
Madam Speaker, we adopted the rules adopted by the Republican majority in the last Congress dealing with this subject.
With all due respect, we never adopted impeachment inquiry rules.
Of course not.
We never did.
You're talking about
The last
subpoenas
time it
and
was
right
done
to
was
documents.
during Bill Clinton's
He's
time in office.
Madam Speaker,
That's
if
the
he'll
last
yield,
time it was done.
he's talking about subpoenas. He's talking about right to see documents.
I'm talking about
the
fairness.
Select Committee on
Both
Intelligence.
sides having equal access to call witnesses, to counter things that are said that are inaccurate, which are right now not being allowed to happen. And again, it's in secret. Nobody can see. You can make claims or statements about fairness. The members, the minority members of the committee have just said it's not fair. And so you can make it fair. You can bring a rule up that we would support that would actually allow both sides to have the same access to information and witnesses. You could do that right now. And I'd ask the gentleman, would he be willing to do that?
Will the gentleman yield?
And I'll yield.
I'm willing to follow the rules that you imposed upon us.
On impeachment inquiries?
We didn't have an impeachment inquiry.
This is an impeachment inquiry. You just
No,
admitted.
the rules of the
It is.
committee in terms of subpoenas and witnesses. We're following that rule. He complains about it. Madam Speaker, he hasn't answered the substantive question. They don't have an answer to the substantive question. Clearly, the testimony that was given yesterday by the acting chief of staff clearly indicated putting leverage on Ukraine to get something we want. And clearly the president mentions the election
And
of
the
2020.
chief of staff talked about
But
corruption.
now, Madam Speaker,
which is the law, by the way. The law says we have to
are
root
you
out
reclaiming
corruption.
your time?
Yield back.
Thank you. He mentioned the Justice Department. Mr. Barr is essentially Mr. Trump's lawyer. Mr. Trump mentioned him in the transcript, too. It's not a transcript, it's a report of the call. Said, talk to Barr, and he'll come over there with you and talk about this corruption, i.e. Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, not crowdsource.
They did.
Madam Speaker, the Justice Department refused to investigate this case. Notwithstanding the waterfall of facts and information that raise questions, we haven't resolved the answers to those questions, but we are investigating them because it's our constitutional responsibility. And I would say to my friend, we could go on for the next 5 hours talking about this. We would not agree. You would continue to say about process. My perspective is we're pounding on the table because the facts don't want to be discussed. The only reason I brought up Turkey is because by a vote of 354 to 60, we said the actions of the President of the United States were inappropriate and dangerous and helped our enemies, not our allies. That's what we said in that resolution. And very frankly, two-thirds of the Republicans voted for that because they were concerned about our national security interests. We're concerned about our national security interests when a President of the United States is talking to a foreign leader, talking about elections, past, present, or future. Inappropriate, in our opinion. And we think inappropriate in the minds of the American people, but we'll see. And we'll have a vote on that at some point in time. But first, we're going to find out what the facts are. And we have witnesses coming forward to give us those facts with every Republican member of the committee able to be there, able to question witnesses with equal time, because we believe that's fair. And very frankly, he says, well, they don't have a right to call witnesses. They do have a right to suggest calling witness, and the committee could vote on it under Republican rules that we adopted. So, Madam Speaker, I would hope that perhaps we could go on perhaps to something else, because we're not going to reach agreement on this. We're going to continue to have what we believe are fair, proper, consistent with the rules, consistent with the Constitution of the United States, consistent with the laws of the United States of America, to find out whether this president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. And then when we conclude an answer to that question, every member of this House will have availability of all the information. And very frankly, Mr. Schiff says in his letter to all of us that once the witnesses have been concluded, that we can see that. What he doesn't want is to have the witnesses reading one another's testimony and parroting it. That's a fair thing to make sure that we don't have one witness just simply adopting the testimony of another witness. We want the truth, not parroting of other information. So I would hope we can move on. I'm prepared to continue to speak about this, but I don't think we're going to reach any conclusion beyond what we've already stated on both sides.
Well, if both sides wanted the truth, they would let all witnesses be able to come forward. You shouldn't be so insecure in your claim that you won't even let somebody come and give an alternative view of some of the secondhand, in many cases, third-hand information.
Speaker, I would ask the whip
people that have political
do you know,
bias.
will you yield for just a second on that point?
I would yield, but we've got to
you have the
address
name
the
of a witness
fundamental
who wants to-
question of the precedent that you are trashing and rolling over and running backward over, is that there have been only three in the history of our country, impeachment inquiries. All of them started with a full vote of the House, and all of them had rules of fairness where both sides could participate. That's not the case here. That's not fairness. It's surely not how it's been done all other times. Maybe you think the other 3 times it was done wrong and you've got a better way. But the public doesn't buy it. That's not fair when you only let one side tell their version.
Polls reflect that the public believes we ought to be doing what we're doing.
Polls reflect that there is going to be an election next year, and they want to be able to decide the next president. They don't want the Speaker and Chairman Schiff to be deciding behind closed doors who the next president will be. That's not how we should be conducting business. We should be moving on to other issues, like those bills that would lower drug prices, like bills that will address so many other problems that families are facing, where there's actual work, bipartisan work, that's being done by relevant committees, and they're moving bills out, and none of them are moving through this House in a bipartisan way that could become law. And so we sit here just days away from a potential government shutdown, and what's the focus? The focus is on a one-sided, closed-door impeachment inquiry instead of those issues.
Will the gentleman yield?
And I would yield.
Madam Speaker, we have moved over 250 bills to the Senate. A number of those are very important bills in the sense they affect a large number of people. We passed making permanent the Land and Water Conservation Fund. 133 Republicans voted for that bill. It sits languishing in the United States Senate, led by a Republican leader. We passed an anti-hate resolution. 173 Republicans voted for that. We passed comprehensive background checks. Now, only 2 Republicans voted for that. And 90% of America, 90% of America supports that bill. It sits languishing in the United States Senate unattended. We have passed 96% of the funding of government prior to June 30th. 96%. Hadn't been done before. It sits, not a single bill has passed the Republican-led United States Senate. Not a single appropriation bill. We passed a number of bills to make sure that the ACA was stable and that pre-existing conditions. Republicans didn't vote for that. Well, actually 8 did. It sits languishing in the United States Senate. We passed a bill on climate action, what the Joint Chiefs of Staff say is one of the major challenges to our security. 3 Republicans voted for that. It sits languishing in the United States Senate. Now, the reason I go through this, we passed disaster relief. That did pass. That did pass. We passed a lot of health legislation and prescription drug legislation. We said prescription drug companies can't pay generics not to bring their product to the market, called pay to delay. We passed that. It sits languishing in the United States Senate. Now, it either sits languishing in the United States Senate because Mitch McConnell is against all of those, or it sits languishing so the Republicans can say, you haven't done anything. All you're doing is impeachment. That's baloney. Madam Speaker, we had a markup yesterday on a major bill that's going to save $345 billion, according to CBO, and to bring prescription drug costs down for every American. It was marked up yesterday. We're going to bring it to the floor before we leave here this work period. And we're going to pass it. I don't predict how many Republicans are going to vote for it, but I predict this: it will sit languishing in the United States Senate. We passed an Equality Act so that every American would be treated consistent with our declaration that all are created equal, not just some. It sits languishing in the United States Senate. So don't say we haven't done anything. Don't say impeachment is taking all our time. It is not. We have one committee right now, other committees also. One committee now that's giving attention, as it should. But the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the Education and Labor Committee, so many other committees are dealing with substantive issues to make sure the lives of our people are better for the people. So I could read another 30 bills like that languishing in the Republican-led United States Senate. We are doing our work. Government was shut down when we took over. The first time in history, government was shut down when a new Congress was sworn in. First time. We spent 30 days just opening up the people's government. And so we passed appropriation bills, but not one has passed the United States Senate, led by the Republican leadership in the United States Senate. So sad. We ought to be doing our business. We are doing our business. We are doing the people's business. We are making their lives better. And we're going to continue to do it, and we can do the same as well in dealing with the constitutional protections and the protections of our national security, dealing with the President of the United States. I yield.
Well, thank the gentleman for yielding, and on so many of those bills that the gentleman mentioned, the gentleman failed to point out the poison pills that were attached to those bills to ensure that they went out in a partisan way. And case in point is the bill you mentioned last night. I was there in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And again, you take a package of bills. Here's two different alternatives. People wonder why Congress can't get things done. You had a package of bills to lower drug prices that every Republican and every Democrat on the committee voted for. Worked for months to put together. Good work, sincere, dedicated work by the people on the Committee of Jurisdiction, passed out of committee unanimously to lower drug prices. Then last night, you saw a package of bills on drug prices that resulted ultimately in socialist-style price setting, and it went out on a party line vote. Not one Republican voted for it. So if you can imagine in divided government, which we are, Democrat House, Republican Senate with a 60-vote requirement, and a Republican president, if you want to pound on a table and make statements, you can send out party line vote after party line vote and say, geez, they're over there in the Senate. Because you know just as well as everyone else knows, those bills won't become law. But if you look at the bills that came out unanimously, why is it that you send out the party line vote to the Senate instead of taking the bill that came out of committee unanimously, that actually would get signed into law by the president? Months ago, that bill would be signed into law and families would be paying lower prices for drugs today, but you won't send the unanimous bill out, you send the party line bill out. And so that's what happens over and over. People see it. You talk about government funding, we're 16 days away from a shutdown, and you haven't even gotten an agreement with the Senate on a 302B number. In other words, how much money we're going to spend.
We sent them bills.
Now, you're going to have some give and take. You're going to have to work with the other side, but that work's not happening because you're focused on a secret, behind closed doors impeachment
Will the gentleman
inquiry.
yield?
It would be helpful if we had that 302B number and you went and got the agreement. And so go over there and talk to them, but don't just send them party line bills. Send them bills that are serious and have a chance to get signed into law. And you know which bills those are. And I would yield.
Will the gentleman yield?
And I'd yield.
You know how this process works. Let them pass whatever bill they want. We'll go to conference. We have our position. They have their position. It's led by your party. They haven't passed a single bill. You talk about getting a 302B. We sent them an offer 30 days ago. We haven't heard any response. Your party runs that. You want to pass those bills? You think they're wonderful bills? Tell Mitch McConnell, pass those bills and send them over here. Let's see what we do with them. You know, we have a two-house legislature. So, Madam Speaker, the Republicans control the Senate. Let them pass a bill. You say everybody's for it, it ought to pass. But don't say you Democrats aren't passing it. We passed appropriation bills. We passed substantive bills on prescription drugs. We passed substantive bills on health care. We passed substantive bills on education. We passed substantive bill on the environment. We passed climate change protection. We passed lots of bills. Now, if they don't like those bills, pass their own bills and send them over here, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, and we'll have a conference and we'll try to resolve it. That's how the legislative process works. Don't say that we have to do your work and our work. We have a perspective, exactly as you did when you were in the majority, and you jammed us over and over and over again. We're not trying to jam you. You had a perspective. We had a perspective. You passed your perspective. You knew the President of the United States, when President Obama was there, he wasn't going to sign those, and you knew the Senate wasn't going to pass them. Your position was, no, that's our position, however. And you had a right to do that. You were right. You had a right to do that. But you want to deny us that right, like you want to deny us following your rules as being unfair. Your rules, you say, is unfair. So, Madam Speaker, I don't get it. We've done our work. We're continuing to do our work. We will continue to do our work on both sides of the ledger, doing our constitutional duty and doing our legislative duty, which may be one and the same. I yield back.
Now, thank the gentleman, and hopefully we can get that 302B number. Hopefully, and Madam Speaker, if we want to talk about some of these bills, I would love if the Majority Leader would bring the package of bills that came out of committee unanimously, where every Republican and every Democrat came together to show, not with poison pills, but to show that we can actually govern in a way that a bill could get signed into law, not party line games. You know, and we all know the issues with the Senate. We can both agree on the differences we have with how the Senate operates, where they require 60 votes, which means in order to do anything, both sides, not one side, but both sides have to come together. NDAA, first time in over 40 years where an NDAA bill came out that sets the rules for our Department of Defense funding in a partisan way. It should have never been that way. It's never happened that way before. And so hopefully we can find a way to come together and address some of these real problems and have real fairness. And unless the gentleman has anything else.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, it's a two-house legislature. One is led by Republicans, one is led by Democrats. The reason we don't have 302Bs is because the Senate couldn't agree with itself on 302Bs. I talked to Mitch McConnell in January of this year. Mitch McConnell comes out of the Appropriations Committee. I come out of the Appropriations Committee. Both of us said we need to get 302As, which is the big number. You then subdivide it into 12 different committees. And he agreed that we ought to do that. He said, but you know, we have to have the president agree. But very frankly, the acting chief of staff did not want to do that, who served on this body, and the leadership of the Republicans had as much trouble with him as we had with him. You just ask Mr. Boehner or Mr. Ryan. He didn't want to have a deal. He wanted a CR. Well, actually, he wanted less than CR because he wanted to go back to the sequester numbers. That's why we don't have a 302B, because neither the White House, Madam Speaker, nor the acting chief would agree. So Mr. McConnell said, I'm not going to do anything the President of the United States won't do. So unlike being the independent Article I body that we ought to be, acting independently and then sending it down to the President, and he makes a decision as to whether he wants to sign it or not, we are simply saying in the United States Senate, if he won't agree with it, we won't put it on the floor. He doesn't have to veto it. The public's got to be so extraordinarily confused and angry about our unwillingness and inability to get our work done, Madam Speaker. We have done our work. The Senate hasn't sent us anything. It's not like they've sent us something we've rejected in a partisan. They haven't sent us anything. They're too busy appointing judges that they think will reflect their ideological point of view. So I'm frustrated, along with the citizens of this country. Everybody here who wants to do a 1 minute or 5 minute is really frustrated. I get that. I'm hopeful we can end this because we're not going anywhere. But we're going to continue to do our job. We're going to continue to pass legislation we think is for the people, make their lives better, focus on them, not us. But we are going to focus on the Constitution and the laws of this country to make sure that they are faithfully executed and carried out. And I yield back the final time.
Thank the gentleman, and maybe we would both agree that it might be helpful if the four leaders, the Speaker, the Minority Leader, the Senate Majority Leader, and Senate Minority Leader went and got in a room and agreed to not leave until they come up with an agreement so we can actually do our business and not wait that 60 days. The Secretary of Defense has made clear how damaging it is to our defense if we don't have a DOD appropriations bill passed and signed into law by the time this funding expires, and how it hurts our men and women in uniform. So hopefully they would all agree to go and have that conversation and ultimately get that resolved, and then we can take care of more of the people's work.